Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this afternoon keynote. We hope you've been enjoying the day so far. My name is Megan Rose, and I'm pleased to moderate this session with Katherine Applegate, author of The One and Only Family, which releases this May and published by HarperCollins Children. Please help me welcome Katherine to our homes, to our screens.
Hello.
Hello, Katherine. How
So
are you?
excited to be here and thrilled. I'm actually in Spain. You're seeing Barcelona behind me, and I was so worried we might not have a decent connection. And look, here we are. It worked. So
We did, and that is a beautiful view indeed. Well, welcome. I'm so excited to be talking to you about this book. Before we got on, I told you a little bit about how many times I've read it because it was a part of middle school curriculum, but super popular with students in all my years of being a librarian. And so I want to ask a few questions, and I'll keep an eye on the chat to take in questions that come in from our viewers. But I first want to start with the very obvious, The One and Only Family. It's the fourth and final book in Ivan's story. So what inspired you to revisit Ivan's story and to bring it to a close?
I never dreamed when I wrote the first book that it would end up being a quartet. In my wildest imagination. In fact, and I always tell young writers this, I got about halfway through the first book and I literally threw it away because I just thought, who is going to read a book written in first person gorilla? This is nuts. And I'm glad I salvaged it, and with the help of wonderful editors and support from my publisher, I was able to pull it off. But I never dreamed there would be more. About year after year after year, when I did school visits, though, I got kids asking, "What about Bob? We need Bob's story." They were obsessed with Bob. And because he was the comic relief, I think it was really fun to visit his voice. And that led, of course, naturally to Ruby, who has a very different voice as a very innocent baby elephant. So we kind of thought that's where it was going to end. And then I came across this article. It's funny because that was the catalyst originally for the first book. It was something I'd read. And in this case, it was about gorilla twins. And I was reminded that Ivan, and we don't know this for sure, but the real Ivan quite possibly had a twin. He was found in the Democratic Republic of the Congo with another baby. They were shipped to Tacoma, Washington. For those who don't know this story, this very true and very bizarre story. And the other infant gorilla was exactly the same age and size. And unfortunately, she passed away almost as soon as she got there because she had pneumonia. And of course, the horrific trip didn't help. So Ivan remained and thrived. And they were never really sure whether that female had been a twin or maybe an orphan gorilla, because orphans will be taken into a gorilla troop quite often. So in my head, I saw this article and they were adorable. And I thought, oh, wouldn't it be funny if Ivan had twins? And what would that look like? And I was a little wary of going there because it was clear to me from the outset that these I started to say kids, these babies were going to have very complicated lives, and that parenting is hard enough, let alone when you're parenting from a zoo. So it just kind of evolved, and the research was absolutely fascinating because I got to look at endless videos of adorable baby gorillas doing adorable baby gorilla things. So in the beginning of the book, I actually have, in addition to a gorilla glossary, there are 6 illustrations by the magnificent Patricia Castellao, who has been there for all 4 books. And it's toddler games. And my favorite is Bother Father. Basically, you've got a twin on either shoulder driving Ivan nuts as they ask him questions incessantly. And it's not far off when you watch infant gorillas in action to see how similar their behaviors are to our own kids. So that part was especially fun.
Wonderful. So more generally about the series, for over a decade, readers have loved this series, all of the stories. What do you think makes Ivan's story so special and impactful to readers?
You know, I think kids have this amazing affinity for animal stories that some adults, not all adults, but many adults kind of lose as they age. And I think so much of it has to do with kids being vulnerable. They're, at the mercy of the whims of these great big human adults who don't always make a whole lot of sense. And I think there's a certain kinship there with animals who are also vulnerable to the whims of humans, often, to very sad and difficult ends. So I think they look at that and they think, um, I have the capacity as a kid to comfort, to nurture, to care for an animal. And so often they do when they're quite young. And it gives them a sense of what it's like to be a grown-up and to parent and to experience empathy and kindness. So I think it works for kids in a very special way that it doesn't necessarily work for adults. And I was that way as a kid. For me, it was always all about animals. And so I think that's maybe the core of it. The other thing that I think really draws people to the story is the fact that it was based on a true story. Even the other characters, as much as I could, I did tons of research. I buried myself in the Tacoma Public Library archives. I went to the mall where Ivan used to live and came across an article that said there had been a baby elephant there briefly. There was a pet store, so Bob, evolved out of that. Some of the characters in the first book in particular, like the seal who ate 100 pennies, that really happened. So a lot of that stuff came out of real life, and that plus the fact that he had such an interesting trajectory. He ended up in I don't want to say a happy place, but he ended up in a better place. And I think it was reassuring to see humans at their very worst and at their very best.
Awesome. How did you manage to balance Ivan's captivity with so many heartfelt moments between him and all of the other characters?
I think that was the hardest, needle to thread because it's a dark story. And as much as there is love and happiness and joy and mutual support, it's a gorilla in a zoo is not the happy ending we would hope for. I always tell kids there are good zoos, there are bad zoos, there are good sanctuaries, there are bad sanctuaries. Zoos are, I think, very, very important in terms of species survival at this point, but they're not all good. Ivan was incredibly lucky in that he ended up at Zoo Atlanta, where he got to be with other Western lowland gorillas and sort of rediscover what it was like to be a gorilla. But I knew it was really dark, and I wasn't sure that kids could handle it. Then I realized, though, as I created this sort of menagerie of friends, including human friends, that the support and the love and the camaraderie and the jokes would leaven the darker sides of the story. I felt that same way going into book 4, though, because now you have Ivan more mature, wiser, and suddenly caring for these two vulnerable infants and trying to figure out what their future is going to look like. And I knew once again I would have to go into some complicated stuff. But by this time, I'd done so many school visits, hundreds of school visits, that I knew kids could handle it. I'm always amazed at how sophisticated they are, how ready to deal with nuance and complication. There's a character in the first book named Mac, who is a really complicated guy. Some good, some bad. And I wasn't sure kids could fathom that, absorb, the complexity. And absolutely they did. They saw that he loved Ivan. They also saw that he mistreated him. And so I went into the fourth book knowing it would be okay.
Wonderful. So throughout the series, you introduce readers to this diverse cast of animal characters. Each one has its own unique personality and voice and backstory. Could you share the process of how you created these characters? You touched on a little bit of how met Bob and some of those details, but can you share a little bit more?
It was funny. I actually I use this book. It's a little dense. Some writers will probably be quite familiar with it. It's John Truby, Anatomy of a Story, and he talks a lot about a character web. And when your students are writing their own stories, it's a fascinating way to look at. And I'm not just talking about mentor, jester, hero kind of thing. I'm talking about the interactions between all the characters and how if you're really working thematically in a comprehensive way, they will all bounce off of those same core questions. Mac had one take on animals in captivity. Obviously, Ivan had quite another. And so Bob initially, for example, was just comic relief. He was really fun. And I still, when I look at my own dog, Stan, I hear Danny DeVito's voice in my head, who did the audiobook for Bob. But when I actually went to do the novel about Bob, I realized suddenly he had to become a much more complex character. And he had a very kind of sad backstory that I had to get into. He had some guilt, and I had to find a way to voice that. Ruby, on the other hand, was so much fun because she's just, goofy, silly, innocent. And by the time I get to the book, she's starting to grow tusks. And she's a little more mature, but she's still really silly. And she too had a very complicated backstory because she was captured in the wild, not unlike so many of the other elephants at the zoo and Ivan. So each one brought different things to it, and it becomes more layered and more nuanced. And the better you know the characters, the more fun it is because it's, they're like old friends.
Yeah, it's a real treat how much they all love each other. Before I move to the next question, I just want to encourage the audience, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to use the Q&A button and I will add those questions in. So thinking about just some of the many themes that you touch on and really delve into in the story: friendship, parenthood, family, the power of memory, captivity, and hope. How did you approach weaving all of these themes together, though they also resonate with adult readers?
I don't think it's conscious. And I think most writers will tell you that you're not knitting consciously. It comes together in different ways. All these characters have suffered trauma. They've all been through a lot. Friendship for them is the thing that's going to keep them buoyant and functioning. And isn't that true of all of us? It's I think it kind of evolves as you're writing, but I'm not sure it's always a conscious act. You're just trying to piece it together in a way that that kids in particular will relate to. It was funny with this with the first book and the last book. I sort of came full circle. The opening of the first book is in my usual short way. The first chapter is hello. I am Ivan. I am a gorilla. It's not as easy as it looks. And the first chapter of The One and Only Family, the fourth book, is hello. I am Ivan. I'm about to become a dad. I'm hoping it's as easy as it looks. And of course, it's not, as anyone who has ever been a parent will tell you. So he's going into it with some assumptions that don't hold up, but that echo is really, really fun to play off of.
Wonderful. We have a few questions in the chat. We had a couple people come in a little bit late. And so Dawn is saying that her fourth grade, I guess they are watching this live. They want to know, how did you learn about Ivan originally?
Well, that's such a good question because kids always want to know where you get your ideas. Number one question. Neil Gaiman just read a piece, I think it was on Twitter, formerly now X, about this very question because it comes up so much. And everyone has a bazillion ideas in their heads. You just have to ask, what if? You just have to look at the world. You can eavesdrop. I give you total permission to be a little bit of a spy and listen into the world. Conversations will spark an idea. But for me, I've noticed that sometimes the things that I am most angry about are the perfect catalysts for starting a book. For example, Wish Tree evolved out of an article I'd read. I want to say it's in Kansas. I'm not sure I have that correctly, but it was a Muslim family that had just moved into a neighborhood. Somebody put a big note on their door that said, "Go away." And I was incensed. And I just generally, because we're all othering entire groups of people and not listening to each other. And I wanted to talk about that. And doing it from the perspective of a 200-year-old oak tree seemed like a way to get it, a broad perspective. So that was the catalyst for that. Crenshaw was about childhood hunger and homelessness. And again, that was something I was so angry that the kids have to deal with that and that they're so proud of how brave and resilient they end up being. So with Ivan, I saw an article in the New York Times, and this is back when newspapers were actually paper. And the headline said, "A gorilla sulks in a Tacoma mall while his future is debated." And I was outraged. I was shocked. It just broke my heart. And this was before Ivan had moved. This was, he was still, they were still trying to figure out what was going to happen to this guy. By this time, a lot of animal activists had gotten outraged, and they would stand in front of the mall dressed in gorilla costumes, holding signs saying "Free Ivan." So I thought, wouldn't it be fascinating to write that story? I tried to do it sort of journalistically and realized writing from his perspective might give kids a better sense of what it was really like. So once I'd read the article, I did research. And this is why librarians are the best human beings on the planet, because they can help you find out what you need to know when you're researching your stories. And research is my favorite part. I think I write about animals because it gives me a chance to do lots and lots and lots of research. And I went to the Tacoma Public Library, and this wonderful librarian came out with a giant box of old newspaper clippings, and they were all crumbly and yellow. And I found out so much that way about Ivan's life that I would not have known otherwise. And of course, depending on what you're writing about, you interview people. When I just finished Otter and was able to go spend some time at the Monterey Bay Aquarium and hang out with otters. I mean, how is that not the best job in the world? So there are so many ways to find good stories. But if you're stuck, think about what makes you mad. What are you passionate about? What do you care about?